So you would have to unparent it and then move the circle and then reparent it. So you could, let me show you an easier way to unparent in that middle mouse thing I was doing. So if you select the forearm and then go to edit, and there's an unparent option in the menu. So sometimes in the outliner, it's like hard to like middle mouse drag stuff, but if you click that forearm, go to, at the very top of Maya, go to edit and go to unparent, it'll pop out that from underneath and you can move that circle to where you want it and then reparent it after you move it. Cool, so there's a few issues with this that would make it difficult to animate with this. And the first one is that because there's no parent above the circle, we just moved it within the world's coordinate system. We have values on the translate X, Y, Z, and we have a value on my rotate, which got there by accident probably. But because of that, like if I were to zero these out, let me make sure that I'm set up here. So let me parent my forearm to my control. So if I were to like, let's say I want to like, let's say I pose this guy's elbow and I'm like, man, I just want to go back to his default kind of pose. If I go and zero out all these things on that circle, it's going to shoot back to the origin with our forearm, which is not ideal. So if I undo that and go back, we need to fix that. And there's also another thing too, like maybe this isn't oriented 100% down, like me, fix this here, sorry. So we kind of want these rotation axes to be like pointing down the joint, and his forearm is pretty straight up and down, so it's not so much of an issue. But let's say the shoulder is a better example. So let's say if I make another circle, so I go to create, and for this one it's more of like a demo, so you can follow along if you want, but you don't have to. So I'm going to create another circle. I'm going to move it up by his shoulder and kind of just roughly place it, not being overly obsessed with the precision. But so now if I take like that upper arm geometry and parent it to this shoulder one, awesome, like we get a little pivot point out there that we could rotate this from. But if I go to twist, like if I just want to twist my upper arm, we have no clean rotational axis to do that with. It's just like, I have the Y axis that I can click on, but it's kind of like doing this weird thing. And if I, the X probably kind of works okay. The Z probably works okay, but that Y axis is not ideal. So really what we need to do is, I'm going to unparent that geometry from my control again. We would really need to rotate our control so it matches the orientation. I don't know if you can see like this red X axis. I kind of want, and really I want this Y to be pointing down the same angle as my upper arm. And again, it's going to just be an eyeball thing. And to make this easier, I can actually turn on a little XYZ thing for this circle. So if I go up to display and I go to transform display, and I'll show this again. So if I'm going too fast, I apologize. If I turn on, so go to display, transform display, local rotation axes, it'll actually show me, and mine's not, why did it pop up? Oh, there it is. So if you go to wireframe, if you hit the 4 key on your keyboard, we get this little indication of our orientation of our circle. So you can see as I rotate it, nothing's happening. Hang on a second. That's strange. Okay, hang on. Let's see. Okay, my glitch. But you can see when I start to rotate it, we get an idea of like where that Y is pointing. And we kind of want to, I can actually zoom out. And I want that like Y to be pointing in the same like rough angle as our upper arm. And again, you could go to the side, and if there's any offset here too, like we would want, this is kind of tough to look at for you guys, I apologize, but we would also want it to match the angle from the side as well. So that way, when I do eventually parent that geometry to this little circle, hit the P key. So now if I want to twist that upper arm, now I have a clean axis that I could grab and twist. And again, I didn't place my circle perfectly, but as you can see, like we get a much nicer, and if I actually do a better job of placing that circle, I'm going to unparent my geometry. And again, you don't have to follow along with this step. I just want to give you guys the concept of our controls orientation in relation to the geometry that we're working with. So I'm going to unparent that upper arm, and I'm going to fix my placement of that little circle to be more centered within like this like little ball joint that we have. So you can see it's kind of not really placed in the center of it. So I'm going to move it back. I'm going to kind of move it this way here. So it's a little bit better centered now. So now if I parent my geometry to there, it should be like a better result when we rotate it on the Y. So now it's a little bit cleaner when we rotate that. So again, that same issue is still there. If I try to zero out all my transforms and rotations and put these to 0, it's going to put my upper arm at the origin, which is not what I want. So we need a better way of making these controls, or something else that's going to help the situation where we can zero out these controls, transform and rotate, so you get back to this character's default pose after we set them in a weird pose or animate them or whatever. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to unparent. So I'm just going to kind of get this back to where it was when I can just go file open and reopen my scene. So kind of like James was saying a second ago, if you jack up your scene and you're like, man, I totally blew it, just go file open scene and go back to your scene again. So I'm going to go to Jeff Robot, which is mine, and go to open, and I have my fresh robot that's been untouched, and start from scratch, right? So let's, again, I'm going to hit the 5 key on my keyboard so he's gray. So the way we can make it so that we could zero out of control, but we could keep it in its little point in space, is we just need to put a parent above it that's going to absorb those transforms and rotates and have this child be moved into place, but that's zeroed out still. So what we do is we could go create and go to NURBS primitive and make a circle like we just did. But we want to add an extra transform as its parent. And a transform is like, it's just like these, but there's no shape to it. It's just like an empty pivot point. So if I select my NURBS circle and I go to edit and then group, or you can hit the G key on the keyboard, what that does is it creates an empty transform above it, which we could then move into place, but the NURBS circle stays untouched, almost like how the shape is untouched when you move a vertice. But I'll do that again. So let me just delete this stuff. So again, I'm creating a NURBS circle. And I just want to add an empty transform above it as its parent. There's no shape to this transform, it's just a pivot point. And I could either have my circle selected and hit the G key, that groups it. Did it? Maybe it didn't do it. Or I'm sorry, Control G. So if I select my circle and do Control G, it should, there we go, puts a group above it. And then now there's a plus sign next to that group, and I can see I have my NURBS circle, then I have my group above it. Or if I undo that, if I select my NURBS circle and go to edit, group, does the same exact thing. I have my little hierarchy where I have a group and I have my circle. So the advantage here is I could grab that group, move that in space.
So should group be first?
In the hierarchy.
It's not a, so you got NURBS circle, should group be underneath?
Group should be on top of it. So group is the parent. So if that's messed up, just grab your NURBS circle and go to edit unparent, or you could just delete it and make a new one. So if I unparent mine, edit unparent, so now I have this like group floating out in space. I'm just going to delete that group. If I have my NURBS circle, there's nothing above it or anything. If I have that selected and do Control G, it'll make a new group with that circle as its child. So it should look like this, where you have the group on top and the circle underneath it as its child. So if I move that if I move the group, I can move that group out into space and it's bringing the child with it. So the group has the transform XYZ values on it, but if I select the circle, it's all 0 because that is 0. This is very confusing. What's that?
My computer is dying.
Oh, is it? Let me get the plug.
I don't know if there's chargers.
Yeah, there should be. If I can figure out how to open this cabinet. Is there a key? What do you call it, Justin? What's that?
All the stuff is going so bad.
It's okay. This is super abstract stuff. It's not as fun as like modeling and making cool looking things, but these are like fundamental concepts that are important to animation to understand. So it's not as glamorous as, let's say, making this robot guy, but being able to make a move and understand these things is super important to build your foundation of everything else.
Mechanics.
Exactly. Yeah, so let me call Justin and just see if get the power strips up.